Yuma, welcome to Floriade Reimagined and Let's Talk. I'm Dan Bourchier, and it's great to have your company in these unusual times of COVID-19. And I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians, the Ngunnawal people who have managed and maintained culture, language, this land, sustainability for many thousands of years. So important to acknowledge that as we start and have these conversations about sustainability now and into the future. And you're probably wondering why this is online. We have a very small audience here, as many as we're allowed under the COVID-19 restrictions. Everyone is physically distanced, and of course hand sanitizer is everywhere. And that's why it's so important that we share this with you on the Floriade website, where there's also plenty of information about how you can get involved in the reimagined celebration of spring this year. And I just want to pay special thanks to our sponsors, the ACT Government, the National Capital Authority, Canberra Centre and National Circuit, without whom we wouldn't be able to have events like this, which, while we're physically distanced, it's more important than ever to be socially connected. And that sense of community, well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about with this book here, the Edible Garden Cookbook and Growing Guide by Paul West, who's with us now. Good afternoon.
Hi, Dan.
Great to have you along.
Such a pleasure. And what you said about it being a small audience before, it's massive. Just like you can't see it. I know you can't see it on the live thing, but there's about 5,000 people in this auditorium.
Wow.
All socially distanced. Hello, everyone at the back. Can you see us? The atmosphere here is electric.
I'm feeling G'd up already. You're a TV host, an oyster farmer, an author. Is there anything you don't do?
I actually went through this with my wife the other day about all the different jobs that I've done in my life, and it'd be a bit too much to put on a business card. I think I don't know if there's anything that I don't do. I'd certainly have a go at anything.
Right.
That's but yeah, I'm yet to kind of come across something. Actually, probably one thing I don't do is one thing.
What's that?
One thing. I do lots of things.
Right. So you don't limit yourself to just one thing.
Or make good jokes, perhaps. Might be the other thing that I don't do. That went off way better in my head.
You got some
that was a zinger.
Sympathy laughs.
But when you have to explain the joke afterwards, and add the comedy to it after the joke, it's that's desperate times for me.
It might have been more the receiver rather than the issuer.
No, it was me. You can never blame yourself. If a joke doesn't land, it's never the audience's fault. It's the delivery.
What is the Edible Garden?
So the Edible Garden is, I guess, where my focus went in life after River Cottage. I was down on the south coast of New South Wales from 2013 to 2016, shooting the Foxtel production River Cottage Australia, which is now shown on SBS as well. And when it wrapped up and the farm got sold and I was at a bit of a loose end, I guess I had to reimagine, or maybe not reimagine, but think about what it was that the program was actually, what it stood for, because I think it was more of a success than anyone had anticipated.
Well, let's jump back for anyone who's not familiar with it.
Yeah, okay.
What is
anyone here not familiar with
the River Cottage?
Because there's a door there.
You're also going to have a big audience online. So
yeah. Well, there's a button up there to press.
They might be just discovering you now.
Yeah, well, so River Cottage Australia was the Australian adaptation of a UK format that basically we took over a small farm in central Tilba, 20 acres ex-dairy property. And when I moved there, it was a farmhouse and a boundary fence. And that's about it. And over the course of 4 years, the television production followed my journey of going from someone who had more of just a cooking background as a chef to somewhat of a primary producer. Not necessarily, I don't think I could ever really call myself a farmer. More like a hobby farmer. River Cottage is kind of like hobby farming on TV. But it was a really amazing experience because as a consumer of meat and as someone who had worked at a relatively high-end restaurant and a consumer of produce, I should say, you get a really, especially from the cookery and the chefing part of it, you're taught how to judge produce, basically, before it goes into a meal. And I thought I had a really good understanding of what went into producing amazing food, because as a chef, you kind of feel like that's what you do. It's you take raw ingredients, you do your kitchen wizardry to it, and then you make amazing food. But what I came to appreciate during the time on the River Cottage farm was that the kind of knowledge and passion of chefs has to be matched or bettered in every single way by the passion of primary producers as well. Because has everyone here tried to grow food at home or successfully grown food at home? Because, it's like people say, homegrown always tastes better. That's a lie. Homegrown often tastes better. Homegrown can taste way, way better, but it doesn't always taste better. Because even if it's some supermarket produce that's been picked in Western Australia, shipped over here, chances are it was grown by someone who really knows how to grow a cabbage. Whereas if you've tried to put a cabbage into your backyard and it's been smashed by moths and you didn't water it, then you watered it too much, then it hailed on it, and then you went away on holidays for 2 weeks, to the south coast, because that's probably about the only place we can go these days. And so your cabbage isn't that great. So I guess what I picked up there was really a deep appreciation of just how much passion and knowledge and understanding has to go into producing amazing food.
And it sounds like that was probably then a reframing which led to this book.
Yeah, so I think one of the things about the River Cottage program was that despite our culturally, we still value the bush, we still value farmers, and I guess that's still, that kind of person of the land is still woven into, in some way, maybe in a tokenistic way these days, the kind of national identity. But in reality, we are one of the most urbanised populations on Earth in Australia, and we kind of cling to our cities, and our country towns, our regional areas are becoming increasingly unpopulated. The density is kind of dropping down there as our cities grow and expand. And I realised that the program that we made with River Cottage was inspiring to people. That was the feedback I was getting, but it was inspiring in a way that was aspirational, not achievable. It was kind of like, wow, one day I'd like to do that when the kids have left home and I'm in a different position and I'm like ready to retire. I'll go and start a hobby farm. Bad idea if anyone's thinking about doing that. It's like a farm is not a retirement plan, a good one. It's a really hard physical job. And you're better off just like playing golf if you want to retire, not hobby farming, unless you want to do some backbreaking labour. And so I kind of took that information and that realisation that we were a very, metropolitan, very urban society, and looked at the principles that I felt made River Cottage popular. And to me, they were kind of a celebration of people, a celebration of place, and a celebration of produce. And the three of those things I feel combined to make a culture, so that when you have those three elements together, every geographic location on the planet will have some unique expression of those three, those three elements, those three pillars of culture. And I thought, well, what's stopping those principles or those foundations of culture being transferred to an urban context? And the answer is nothing. We're human beings, and in civilized society have been growing food in cities since cities were a thing. We didn't have refrigerated logistics to ship them internationally or cross-state or long distances across land. Cities throughout history, including up to very, very recent colonial times, were all cited on their ability to grow food to feed the population that would then call that city home. And we see lots of great, especially in that kind of 50s imagining of the Australian dream, the quarter-acre block, the weatherboard cottage, give me a home among the gum trees, fruit trees and roasts and things like that. That there's been some element of food growing happening in suburban and urban Australia as well for the bulk of its history, and it's something that I feel like has been only relatively recently lost to a degree, and that I'd imagine would be a reflection of the kind of explosion of convenience culture where why would you grow food when you could just click a button and it comes to you? It's why would you go through that like 3-month effort of growing tomatoes when you can just click and collect from your local supermarket? But there is, I believe there's strong reasons why it's worth that effort. And that's really what that book is an exploration of.
And I wonder if one of the challenges is the fear of getting it wrong, of not knowing exactly how to do it.
Dan, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that there's, in two elements of the book, that fear of a lack of knowledge applies to both the growing component of it and of the cooking component of it. And especially in the cookery role, I feel like that so much of our food culture now is competitive. That most of the food media that we consume on television in particular is competition format cookery, where you're seeing everyday people, that like to cook, preparing recipes and then putting their heart and soul and their sound bites into that recipe, and then putting it in front of judges and then being ridiculed or embarrassed or praised, or the jeopardy of how that dish or that recipe is going to be received. And human beings have this inherent ability to empathise. So when we see someone going through something, we can kind of feel it. So I feel that, like, if we're sitting there watching everyday people cooking food and then having it judged, and you look at it and you go, well, that's like a restaurant dish, and that wasn't good enough. And then you look at like your little stew that you've got in the slow cooker, and you're like, oh, well, that's just a plate of brown, nutrient-dense goodness. They wouldn't like that very much. Whereas really, if you looked into the hearths and stovetops and fireplaces of most cultures throughout history, it would be much more likely to be a pot of brown, nutrient-dense stew than it would have been some elaborate 25-touch, 3-hat, fine dining dish with like fake soil and foam and gels and all this kind of like stuff that you need someone to explain to you how to eat it. And if you just take the leaf to the left, and that's actually your serving device, and just scoop some of the soil onto that, think of the ocean, look over your left shoulder, turn back to the right and consume. Enjoy. That's obviously a little bit of an exaggeration, but I did my apprenticeship at a place that was very similar to that, where they'd put food on the table, and part of the whole theatre of the place was it was kind of meant to bewilder you as a diner. You're like,
oh my God, what do I do next?
People start eating the flowers on the table because they think it's the third course. They're like, oh, this is good. No, that's so just clever. Table decoration. Sorry about that. But yeah, and I think there's a think tank based here in Canberra called the Australian Institute. And the Australia Institute? Not the Australian Institute, sorry. And they commissioned a big study into backyard and home food production in Australia. And one of the key barriers that they identified to stop people growing was that lack of knowledge. And it's one of those things where it's like another language if you aren't experienced in it. When you see people like talking about gardening and talking about growing things, and you're like, I don't know where to start. And so I really wanted to put together a title that was really approachable, really accessible. I find that a lot of gardening titles are written by gardeners for gardeners. It's like if, gardeners buy other gardeners' titles, and they're like, it's all detailed, and it's got, Latin names, and it's got, the exact different, all the things you need to know about soil pH and all this stuff. But
which leaf to use as the scoop for the soil.
Exactly. Yes, the lower cotyledon leaves are much better for the... Anyway, I'm just making words up now. Not a biologist. But I wanted to really make something that felt like people could approach it, that families could approach it, and that it created a space where people can just feel like they can have a go.
And it struck me, by extension of that point, that you've gone through and picked out vegetables and fruits. So this one where you've got corn, and you talk about the growing process, what times of the year, how to go about that, buying it, like where kind of how to tailor, I guess, or tether purchasing processes, but then also how to go through the whole process of that. How much response have you got to that about, demystifying and making that process easier?
I think, the response has been great to it. Yeah. I think a lot of people have used it as a bit of a well-thumbed Bible for beginning their journey into backyard food production. And that book was released actually about this time last year, and probably about a week ago last year. A week in the future now I'm getting confused on my timelines. My chronology's all out of whack. A week ago in the future, but last week. But anyway, September 20-something, 2019 it came out. And then I guess the coronavirus, the pandemic, and the initial lockdown in New South Wales, ACT, the nationwide lockdown, and the kind of food shortages that happened there, a lot of people went to their home gardens. And I remember having a conversation with Clive Blasey of the Diggers Club. I just love a gratuitous name drop every now and then. Clive and I call it, hey Clive, hey Paul, just two beardy gardeners having a chat. Should we get Costa on the line as well? And, you know, Clive's obviously been around for a long time, as have the Diggers Clubs, and he said that financially difficult times are a boon for gardening businesses, because that's where people go back to the basics of feeding themselves. And people were spending more time at home, so they could look after a garden. They didn't have all these additional kind of work and stress pressures. And the fact that people, I think for many of us, the beginning of this year was the first time where you've actually seen that our modern food system is fragile. We kind of take it for granted that just every time you go to the supermarket, there's going to be food there. Like I can't think of a time in my life other than the beginning of this year where you go to a supermarket and you're like, I wish my pantry was a bit better stocked. And so I think that was a bit of a wake-up call for a lot of people to take some sort of control and sovereignty back over their food production.
Do you reckon that'll continue on, or like so many things, we have a situation, albeit we haven't had one like this in our living memory. Yeah. But we'll get to a point in a year's time where that kind of gets forgotten or written into the history pages.
I think pessimistically, you're right. That a lot of that.
Sorry to bring it down.
No, but it's true though. But even if 1 in 1,000 of those people that the passion was sparked for during the pandemic sticks at it, that's a better result than no one. But the other barriers to entry to home gardening that the Australian Institute identified was time, was one of the key things as well. Time, knowledge, and growing space.
And the kicker on your book is building a life around food and community.
Yes.
The pandemic, in my view, has made us more acutely aware of how much we depend on a community, being either that in our family, in our neighbourhood. I wonder if that's another way of looking at this around community gardening. Yeah. I don't know, what do you think about that?
Well, I kind of feel like the three areas that I explore in the book of growing food, preparing food for the table, and community or small family, extended group of friends, community style events are inseparable. That it's only been very recently that we've kind of delineated them to the farmer grows food out there, you cook food in your kitchen, and you only eat it with yourself or your immediate family. Whereas throughout the course of human history, the three things have been totally inseparable. They're essentially almost one, and they're the same process, just different steps. And I feel like that and that perhaps has been exposed during the pandemic, that we have psychological needs that are hardwired to kind of thrive under those circumstances. When we have food security, when we have emotional security in the form of community, then the brain's happy because we've always strived and needed that as a social creature, and modern society is removing that experience for us. We don't prepare our own food. We don't grow our own food, and our communities are increasingly being digitized. That kind of flesh and blood connection, which has been so essential throughout history, is increasingly being replaced by a digital connection. And though our culture and our society is evolving at a rapid rate, like our biology can't keep up with that. Our physiology, our brain wiring. So we're changing at this rapid pace, but we still have these kind of primal needs of connection to other people and to the food that we eat and to the places we live.
And you've got little boys, and you focus on they're a part, particularly the first part of them being a part of the journey of that. I wonder what's that been like, and what have you learnt maybe from them?
Yeah, well, Digger's too old and fat to sell books now. He's my dog. He used to be really cute when we had River Cottage, and he was kind of like a great, like, oh, look at the cute dog. So he's on the outer. And now the kids are front and centre. Like, look at those cute kids, buy this book. But no, it really does brings it into focus. Like so many things in becoming a parent, it's kind of in a way can adjust your worldview forcibly because you've got kids there. And because you're responsible for the food that they're eating. It's like when you kind of eat for yourself, if you're bearing the burden of responsibility for yourself, you know, you can, it doesn't matter. You have a cheeseburger at 11 o'clock at night, whatever, you know, like you can get over that. You can justify that to yourself. But when you are the person who is solely responsible, along with your partner or whatever, for kind of nourishing the growth of children, then you're like, oh no, cheeseburgers are bad, you know. It's and
we're having a lettuce leaf instead.
Yeah, exactly. I wish that I had I could get up here and say, you know, as a kind of cookery and garden writer, when my children aren't growing broccoli, they're eating broccoli. But my 3-year-old, for example, the other day, you know, he's this little nugget little guy. Like, Bowie, what's your favourite food, mate? What's your favourite thing to eat? Because I'll cook it for you for dinner. He's like, pizza and fish and chips and calamari and barbecue sauce. And I was like...
Shoulders slumped a bit.
Okay, well, the ones that I make? No, the ones from the shop. And, you know, so they're classic. They're, you know, I'm not like... I just love those, you know, the Instagram nutritionist parents that are like, you know, they're like, oh, little Angel has just prepared herself another bowl of, you know, macrobiotic greens. Incredible. And look at it. I don't even have to convince her. I've got to stop her from eating so much broccoli. Oh, parent troubles. You know, and meanwhile...
you must love
I love it. Because, you know, every night, like, I made a yellow curry last night and my wife's like, it's got chili in it. You know, like the kids aren't going to eat it. I'm like, and what difference is that going to make from every single other night of the week when I make them food that doesn't have chili in it? And they kind of come up to the table and go, and I've become that parent. I'm like, well, that's for dinner. That's what's for dinner. Dad, what's for dinner, Dad? Food. I stopped telling him what I was actually preparing because usually it was followed rapidly by, I don't like that. And I'm like, you had it for dinner last night or 2 nights ago, you loved it? I'm like, no. So, but that said, you know, they are actually pretty good. And the oldest, who's now 5, he is a chicken whisperer. He's got his own chooks, and he goes out and I'll be like, where's Otto? And he'll be up in the chook coop and he'll be like sitting down here like this. And there'll be chickens all around him and he'll be holding one like this. And he'll just spend like 20 minutes up in there and he'll be like hold them up and talk to them. And they like, if I come out, they run. You know, maybe they saw some episodes of River Cottage through the TV. But if he comes out, they kind of like go down on the ground like this and they let him scoop him up. And he's also hounding me to get the beehive going. And he's growing some carrots. He's growing some carrots. And he's got a mint plant that he likes to eat. I don't know if it's like a precursor to a mojito addiction later in life, but he's like, I think that's about the only salad he eats. Like he won't eat anything else green. Like I put a bit of lettuce on a sandwich, forget it. He's like, even if, you can't even hide it in there, like under the cheese or between the ham. Nah, no chance. What's this? I pushed the whole plate away. But he loves coming out every morning. Yeah, but a mint leaf, like off the bush, only off the bush though. So he comes out, he waters his little carrots, which are about this tall at the moment, you know, and which is a great exercise in patience for a child as well, because carrots are one of the longest things that take to germinate. And they're like, what? And his brother grew some like salad greens that like germinated in like 30 seconds. And so he's the older brother's like, how come Bowie seeds germinated first? Oh, when my carrots can water me like this? So I mean, it's really nice to be able to take that them on that kind of experience of growing.
It must be lovely to be able to share that.
Yeah, with them. Absolutely. Like it does. It kind of, you know, it gives me a great deal of pride and enjoyment to see them. Just to see them enjoying it, you know, like it hasn't been something I've tried to like, you know, force feed them or ram down their necks. It's just something that I do and that they've kind of come to enjoy the beauty of in their own way, you know. So that's they're budding little gardeners. It's great.
What's the no-dig garden?
So a no-dig garden, I mean, there's been some form of them for a long time throughout the course of agriculture, but I guess the term no-dig garden was popularised by a Sydney gardener called Esther Dean in I think it was the 60s or 70s, and it came from her as a result of having a food garden on those really poor, you know, kind of sandstony soils around Ku-ring-gai, Hornsby area up there in the north of Sydney. And sometimes if you're not blessed with a block with great soil, which most people in Australia are not, because we've got very, very few pockets of great arable land. Sometimes like planting in the ground can be one of the main reasons why people fail. Because it's not as simple as just planting a seed in the ground and giving it water. If the soil profile's not there, if the nutrition and life and charge of the soil isn't right, then the plant's doomed from the start. So no-dig gardening is about kind of building layers of organic matter above the ground, and bringing it all in, rather than just buying like a giant mountain of veggie mix soil from a landscaping supplier place. You're kind of using like compost and manure and carbonaceous materials like straw, hay, paper, and you build this. Another term for it is like a lasagna gardener, because it's like a layer of compost, layer of soil, layer of of straw, and water all in. And it actually makes a really beautiful environment for growing plants in, because there's a lot of nutrition in there. It's almost a cross between like a hydroponic growing and an in-soil growing, because there's actually a lot of air in there. It's not just like dense compacted soil, but that allows a lot of root freedom. And so if you've got a rental property and you're not kind of allowed to rip up the lawn and plant 40 square meters of veggies, then a no-dig garden can be a great way to just build on the surface. And it's also a really great option if you don't have great soil. It's a way that, the garden actually breaks down over time, and you can replenish it with additional layers every year that you plant. And through the processes of soil microbiology, you're actually, a lot of that nutrition and organic material that initially goes into the no-dig bed, through microbial and kind of macro environment, like worms and things like that, it gets taken down and enriches the soil underneath.
So it actually
you're building soil.
Twists that, turns that bad soil on its head.
Exactly. Yeah. So
where does composting fit in all of that?
Composting is just that it should be taught in schools. I know it is, but it should be taught as like a fundamental living skill, because I know from the work that I've done with state governments and local councils that organic food waste is one of the biggest problems, in particular for the cities, because it makes up about 65% of all landfill, and because it's an organic compound, it breaks down, it does so anaerobically, it causes all these problems with leachates and gases, and it's a real environmental management drama, especially for cities. Whereas you can kind of take that, all the food that you produce, and the scraps that you produce, and you can make this incredible elixir and tonic for soil that'll enrich any soil. There's no soil that doesn't benefit from composting. And I guess it's a bit more of an appreciation of the fact that through physics, everything, it's a closed loop. That if a food item is being grown on a farm somewhere and then transported to you eat a portion of it, some portion of it goes in the bin. The land where that vegetable or where that meat was raised has been diminished to create what you have. And then in a traditional ecology, you live in a certain area, you die there, you defecate there, it's just the nutrient cycle continues. But because of the way we do it, we export that nutrient, it goes through our wastewater treatments or into the landfill. And so we then become more dependent on chemical agriculture to prop up our soils and our food production, because we've got this extractive process. And again, that's a very modern phenomenon where we became dependent on chemical agriculture after the Second World War. And most traditional societies have really respected the soil and respected that nutrition cycle. So, composting, it can be a little bit touchy, I reckon, if you haven't done it before. I think a lot of people kind of just get one of the black bins, they just keep chucking their veggie scraps in there, and then it's full of rats and like flies, and it stinks, and it's like this kind of unusable sludge. And you're like, I tried composting. Yeah, exactly. And they go out, they have a look in, they pull that phase, they sell the compost bin on Gumtree,
leave the house,
and they never worry about it again. Yeah. But you're essentially playing microbiologist, and you need to create that perfect environment for the microbes to do their work aerobically. But there are other ways, that if you don't want to compost, I mean, worm farming is another great one. You know, they can live in those little worm cafes or converted bathtubs, or even just something as simple as 2 buckets stacked on top of each
There's
other.
even the versions that you can just kind of dig into your garden bed.
Yeah,
It's got just a cute little lid on the top.
Yep.
And because you just kind of throw your stuff in that.
And
I mean, I'm
worms take care
sure
of
that it's a bit more complex than that.
Yeah, but it really isn't, though.
Isn't it?
You know, no, it's the natural systems of the world are long evolved and very powerful for dealing with things like recycling nutrition back into ecology. It's we just have to kind of help.
Well, you talked about how it's a challenge for cities. The ACT has been running a whole heap of trials around the green bins.
Yes.
For, I think, this very purpose. Is that part of the solution? I mean, obviously you're talking and you touch on how we can all be doing a little something. Is that the other part of it as well?
Yeah, I think at the city scale, certainly, because in the book, I guess I gave an option of some sort of nutrition recycling for no matter what circumstances you have. For example, if you live in a unit and you don't have a garden, you can use things like bokashi, which is like a Japanese system where you essentially take your food scraps, you inoculate them with a certain strain of bacteria, and it digests it. It's like fermented food scraps, and that makes it much more stable to go and dig out into your garden. And it's not compost, but it's not straight food scraps either, and you can leave that under your kitchen sink. Then if you've got a small space but no ground, you can worm farm. If you've got a regular backyard, you can compost. You can keep chickens. I haven't been composting lately because my chickens just do such a great job at it, But that said, some people aren't going to have the inclination, some people aren't going to have the time, and maybe they just don't care. But still, they, as consumers of food and creators of food waste, they're a part of that nutrition cycle, that nutrient recycling process. At the moment, it's just going into the ground, into landfill, and causing trouble. So I know I remember a couple of councils in Sydney kicked off with the FOGO, Food and Organic Waste. I'm terrible with acronyms. Food and ground up organs? I don't know. A FOGO.
What?
It's called FOGO anyway. It's FOGO. I'm just
Did
trying
you
to
make
think
that up?
Food, organic, garden. No, I don't know what it stands. I'm going to stop guessing now.
Some sort of program.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds
So,
like.
yeah. The FOGO. Isn't that like the pufferfish liver? That's FOGO. Yeah. And they were composting at the city scale out near Western Sydney there. And it was this incredible operation, and then that material that they used then went back to broadacre agriculture west of the Divide. So the cities were creating nutrition that then went back to the kind of country that was growing the food to feed the cities.
Is essentially completing that loop that you mentioned about where the food comes from in the first place.
Exactly.
And because that can obviously, going back to your earlier point about the no-dig gardens, that can all help immensely with the soil quality, can't it?
Without a doubt. And that's if people have got terrible soil, a no-dig garden's the first place that I point them to, because it's like a raised garden that you don't have to buy like high embodied energy materials like metal, and or you don't have to make a timber enclosure. It doesn't have to be permanent even. You can just grow it in one spot, and then throughout the course of 1, 2, 3 seasons, all that nutrition's filtering into the soil underneath, and you are building soil.
Well, the whole school of thought around companion planting and where things should go compared to others in your garden.
Yes. Well, I've never been great with companion planting. Sometimes I guess I just like to see if plants like one another.
It's like speed dating in
exactly.
your garden.
Like Married at First Sight or something, like Planted at First Sight. And just like putting them all in there. I'm like, so this should be interesting.
Except for Otto, who's waiting on the tiny little
Come on,
carrots.
grow the carrots. I think maybe things like companion planting are one of those things that when you're starting to garden, that you start thinking about, companion, am I doing the right thing? Is this the companion planting? But it's like a very nuanced, perhaps like advanced skill that maybe stops people from having a go because they don't understand that as well. So I just encourage people just to throw things in the ground. Just have a go. Just
see
have
what
a go.
happens.
Yeah.
What do you find easiest to grow?
I
Which you do touch on in your book.
my lawn. Being on the coast down there, it just grows. And I'm constantly bloody mowing it. I'm sick of it because I can't eat it. I can't have goats to keep it down. I can't have a cow that I tie up out the front of my house to mow my lawn in downtown Bermagui, unfortunately. But in terms of the things I find easiest to grow that I can eat would be things like mescaline leaf mixes, things that like are edible leaves that don't form a head. They're just like things like rocket and mizuna, loose head lettuces. And I usually just buy, big seed bag mixes of that and just and sow about 1 metre square every fortnight, maybe every month in winter. And then they just grow like gangbusters. Keep the water up to it, keep the chickens off it, because it's also the chicken's favourite spot. If they ever get out of the coop, they just go straight to the salad bar and they just like tear it to shreds. And really, like those plants have very low nutritional requirements, and they're very fast growing. You can kind of eat the leaves, because it's not creating a fruit. You can eat them when they're that big. You can eat them as a microgreen. Whereas, if you try to grow something like an ox heart tomato, there's so many steps where it can go wrong for you. And that's, the tomatoes, the number one thing that people want to grow. And things like little cherry tomatoes, very easy to grow. But those big, thick slicing tomatoes, you've got to get the nutrition and the water. There's not a lot of wiggle room. They can be relatively forgiving, but you've got to be pretty on your game to get a really big, tasty tomato. Whereas the cherry tomatoes, I don't even plant cherry tomatoes because they just grow.
They just pop up.
Once you've grown one cherry tomato on your property, you'll have cherry tomatoes for life.
Yeah.
So
a bit like pumpkins, aren't they?
Yeah. But
they take a while at the start, but then
but once they're off, they're off.
Take over.
Don't have a nap in the garden in January when the pumpkins are on the loose. But I like growing pumpkins as well, mainly because I need them for photo shoots. Because, as someone that does a rural style program like River Cottage, you can't have your photo taken without a pumpkin and a hay bale.
Is that the rule?
That's the rule.
Okay.
That's the unspoken rule.
Good to
Plaid
know.
shirt, hay bale, pumpkin.
Sorted.
Country. Simple as that. And in fact, I did ask the lovely folk at Floriade to provide me a hay bale to sit on, but instead I've got one of these chairs. But I guess I'll endure. But I do
so resilient.
I'm a tough guy. I'll sit anywhere. But I like putting a pumpkin in, Dan, because it makes you, they're just so voracious in the garden. If you've got the space, you've got one plant, it's just like, look at my abundant garden. It's just this one pumpkin plant climbing all over everything. The garden's going off this summer. Have a look at it. Just don't lie down for too long. 5 minutes max. The tendrils start wrapping around the leg. Lost another neighbour.
What would you say is a starting point for anyone who's not sure where to go about starting? I mean, obviously, the book is a good starting point, but what sort of vegetables should they start with?
The ones I find easiest to grow myself.
Right.
And I recommend to people to start growing in containers or pots as the first thing, because it's, you can grow a decent sized pot, like something like one of these baskets, or even as small as the kind of little pots that are held within there. You can grow a little salad in there, a little salad mix, and if it's something like this, a pot, say that size, you're looking probably 2 $7 bags of potting mix, $14, $3 bag of seeds, $18, and then you'll probably get, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks worth of harvest off that for a family of 2 that eat salad, because, I don't know anyone else's kids that eat salad. I don't have to factor my children into the salad eating.
They're not interested, they pluck
just
it
mint.
out.
Just mint. Yeah, they're like, ugh, too peppery, spicy, Dad. Whatever. Go and eat your mint. And really, then you're not kind of committing to digging up a big chunk of your backyard, because I think as the other kind of negative media aspect of gardening, just like we've got competitive cookery for cooking, and when it comes to gardening, we've got this block backyard blitz mentality where it's like, okay, so I've got this rundown 1/4 acre block with just grass and an old gum tree. I'm going to turn it into a 500 square metre market garden this weekend.
Jamie Jury pops out from
exactly, you
behind the gum tree.
Yeah. G'day. Jamie, put your shirt back on, mate. It's not manpower anymore. But, you go to Bunnings and you get all the stuff and you kind of stress because it's weekend at Bunnings and you're buying stuff, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what you need, so you go in that kind of crazy, I better get one of those, oh, I'm going to need a new shovel because I haven't got that.
That's the Bunnings trap, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the trap, and then you're kind of into it for $1,000 and you're already stressed, and then you go and you do the back breaking because the
only thing you forgot is your lettuce seeds.
Exactly, and then you kind of have this massive weekend on your vegetable garden. You put all this financial and physical effort into it, and then you're just you don't want to look at it for a month. You're done. Whereas like gardening is not, it's the opposite of a blitz. Like, if a blitz can be handy in a garden, like getting some friends over and, if you've got a big weedy garden bed, invite a couple of friends over, cook them lunch and, get everyone to get stuck into the garden, tell them that's what's happening, obviously, first. And be like, come over for lunch. Oh, before we eat, if you could just put those boots and gloves on and just help me weed the nettle patch.
No one comes to dinner parties at your house anymore.
I guess I'll eat your dinner, son, as well. Yeah. But, it can be disheartening when you put so much effort in and we're so accustomed to immediate results that like a long game of like 3 months, 4 months for a yield, your enthusiasm can wane significantly in that period. And so gardening, like I don't find it's like a big effort, no effort type thing. It's a little bit a lot. So even if, you kind of like try to spend 5-10 minutes in the garden every day, you're like, I haven't got time to do the garden, I've got to work, but just taking that 5 minutes in the evening or in the morning to walk around, water a couple of things, watch them, you'll be amazed at how much just that little bit of daily TLC will benefit your garden. And if you don't have a lot of experience, it's like in anything, start small. Like trying to learn any skill, you don't go from like not playing the piano to trying to master Rachmaninoff. You get 3 blind mice down pat first, and and growing some salads in a pot, not even in the soil, at your back door is the 3 blind mice of food growing.
And part of it is the psychology of actually being in your garden and being around plants, and it just makes us feel good, doesn't it?
And that's that. The nature connection, and I kind of make a whole heap of scientifically unfounded claims about human psychology and physiology and ancestry, which I've been doing this whole talk and do pretty much all the time. But having that connection to the natural world, seeing it, experience it, even if it's that's why we love pets. That's why we love houseplants. We live in a world, especially in the urban and suburban environment, that is incredibly disconnected from the ecology that supports us and that we've evolved within. And I believe that we're hardwired to want. And so having a garden, and it helps you reconnect with that. And it also slows you down and brings you to nature's pace. It's not a daily deadline. It's not like a before lunch deadline or a close of business thing where you're like, go do this, go do this, go do this. You see these like incremental monthly changes where, like a plant might, like you just see the new bud stain. Like spring's a great time for seeing that, obviously, where, you just start to see the new leaves come out and you see the little blossoms form. And then the next day, the little leaves are a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And, you kind of go on this like journey of growth with the plants in your garden. And I think having that kind of ability to slow down and just zero in on stuff, like I love it. I just sit there at the back. No wonder my kid does it with the chickens, because sometimes I'll just be there going like this, just staring at them,
eyeballing that mint tree. Mint bush.
Yeah, that mint plant's getting smaller. I thought it was meant to be growing, but you can get lost in it. And what I love about gardens is that there's so much variation to the level of detail that you can engage with. You can engage with a giant fruit tree or a big gum tree or an entire forest, or you can sit there on a little patch of ground and you can look at a patch of bare dirt the size of your thumbnail and see all the incredible little creatures that are crawling over that and all the little interactions they have. And kids are another great one for that, because they bring you down to that level and that pace. You kind of walk around doing your adult stuff. You're on your 4th long black. You're like, oh, my eyeballs are popping out of my head on a Saturday morning. Got to get to bunny to the car, kids. And they're like, Dad, look at these ants. And you're like, oh. No, just kidding. I wouldn't do that. No. Opposite. No. I would never do that. That's great to kind of get down and then, and kind of get that, like that innocence and joy and that kids have in their appreciation for the natural world, because we all have it. We've just, as adults, I think sometimes with the pressures of modern life and, adulthood, that we forget that it's important to connect with those simple little things.
I think that it's too true. What do you want to be the takeout? Because we've touched on a whole lot of different areas.
Yeah. So I think that if what I'd like for the takeaway to be is to appreciate how much benefit there is to us as individuals and families and communities to reconnecting in some way, no matter how small, to how your food is grown, how it's prepared, and who you share it with. And ideally, you grow some, even microscopic part of it. You make things yourself in your own kitchen, and you share the fruits of the labour for both those tasks with the people that mean the most in the world to you. And really, that's if you can get those three things in place, there's not a lot else that you need for happiness. If you can satisfy those three criteria of food security, nourishing food, feeding your family and your friends, and having a dynamic and strong community life, then that is really about all we need.
Yeah, it sounds like a plenty to help us all to connect.
That and a Ferrari.
Well, but ladies and gentlemen, please thank Paul West.
Thanks, everyone.
And you can check out the Edible Garden on Booktopia and find out more details on the Floriade website, where there's also plenty of extra detail about all of the events happening. Floriade Reimagined 2020. Yara, thanks for your time.